Thank you, everyone, for joining us here. Now, unless you know, the title for this track is Security from the Field. I'm not the professor who asks or will fail you if you don't know the topic that you're attending. But just to give a quick highlights, we're going to talk about the malware, about the cyber weapons. We're going to talk about open source intelligence collection and applied artificial intelligence, and also human aspects in the defense and from the adversary perspectives. Now, before we jump into the panel and I start to introduce our panelists, here are a few house rules. The panel is 1.5 hours long. Every panelist has 30 minutes. For their talk, they have 20 minutes, and after those 20 minutes of presentation, we will dive into the topic and ask questions. Now, the questions I encourage also from the panelists as well to be asked to the speaker. And of course, audience, you're here to enjoy also the talks and ask questions. When you do ask questions, please introduce yourself, your name, and your affiliation, and go ahead and ask the question. Now, with this, we will jump right into the first presenter, Florian. Florian, please go up to the presenter's point. And, well, Richard, he's reverse engineering and at Mandiant team. Now it's part of the Google Cloud Security Services. Well, he started to work with computers at the age of 14, but it was a short-lived kind of because he kind of hacked a software and he was banned from touching a computer for a few weeks by his parents. Well, he has three kids, and they are already doing penetration testing and TTP, advanced TTP penetration against him. So his day is 25 hours long, and at least he gets some time for sleep. There you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really proud to be here. And I would start with my slides, hopefully soon. Thank you. The title is quite complicated, I think, so I will try where I come from and what I want to show. My presentation started with the idea to show the usage of malware and the evolution of malware during war times, influenced by not only by the nation-state actor, also by companies in its territory, by e-crime groups around him, and also by the defending side of the opponent. So before we start, I have a little disclaimer. I know it is long, but I will summarize it. This is based on scientific research, and that does not represent the opinion of a certain company, including my employer. But my employer motivated me to present my results. Also, if I name a company directly by name, it doesn't mention this company acts wrong or in a legal way. But every invention, every idea can be abused as well. So please keep that in mind. Also, I try not to highlight and show well-known topics. I try to base on well-known stuff and do not try to overcrowd the slides with adding new content and not the old well-known as well. And the last, and for me the most important, many persons told me when I started, reverse engineering is an art. I think it should be more scientific work, because scientific work is measurable, and I want to measure if my results are good or good enough at least. What does it mean? What is war? Everyone told me at the beginning when I started my research, oh, only inferior parties in asymmetric warfare will use cyber weapons for illegal ways. But nowadays, the world has changed. I think cyber warfare is part of the normal war strategy of an aggressor. So the links between asymmetric warfare, you will also see nowadays in crisis conflicts, and is sometimes similar to terrorism, which acts where small parties or inferior actor acts as aggressor against a larger community or even a state. And with this knowledge on malware analysis, don't don't be afraid, you don't need much of it. With attribution knowledge and defending strategies, I want to show or draw the picture of today and tomorrow. Let's start with the war phases. For war phases, we have the time without war. And there will start the preparation. And preparation, I only look at the cyberspace. Preparation and testing of new cyber weapons, also intelligence and reconnaissance. And the nation, the aggressor, will coordinate its forces. And the forces are not only the e-crime groups and their own military, it is also the companies in its territory, hacktivists, other motivated groups around the world. I think everyone knows it. But if I look to the IOC side during that time, I took the index of relevant forces, so the forces who are combined to this war, and showed how the IOC level will change. And these actors will not be so present in the preparation phase, but with the initial phase of the war, the IOC will increase a lot. And then you have the war strategies. Normally, if everything would well, the outcome of the war will be the end of the war. But normally, not everything works well. The strategies are dependent on the success of sub-strategies and also on the calculation of resources. And resources can change, can be miscalculated on both sides. So what happens? You have to adapt your strategies. And the new strategies in cyberspace means you also need probably more cyber weapons, because your cyber weapons are burned in the first initial phase, and everyone knows it well and how to detect it. And this is like software development process, and software development under pressure has as result often mistakes. We've seen that in the past, like Caddy Viper and ArguePatch, there was a 16 bytes XOR key as input parameter. The algorithm was wrong implemented, and at the end, it was only an XOR with 1 byte. That was a little mistake, luck for all the defenders. And there are other strategies. You can use obfuscation techniques to hide existing malware. And of course, you can rely on old malware and ancient techniques which are not covered yet or anymore in the normal defending systems. And the reason why you do it is you want to have a resource balancing again. Going back to the IOC, I think everyone knows what an IOC is. But going back to the APT1 report, is what quite old, it was a compound structure. And about compound structures of IOC, there are so many talks outside. If you are interested in, Joe Slovic did a lot of them, and it is really great to watch. But what does IOC mean for the security operations centers? Normally, they work that they can handle normal times, time without war. With the increase of the IOC, like hashes, they have to check them, because if government, private sector institutions and companies hand over this IOC to a company and it is not checked, they will be asked, why have you not checked it, when they are hit by an attack? But often these IOC have no content, no meta information. It is useful to check the priority. And that means you have additional searches, you need additional capacity, which is not present in most security operation centers. And you delay the near real-time detection to a delayed detection, which is not really good at war times. Okay, at normal times as well, but in the initial phase, a delayed attack will result in fatal consequences. And so the idea was still to use building blocks or atomic indicators and combine them with AND and OR to have more information and add meta information to it. For example, which system is affected? Is it a Linux system? If I have no Linux environment in my whole environment, I have not to check it. And so other companies decided to implement other ideas like behavioral indicators, or sometimes called indicators of attack. And now you have additional complexity in your system. That is one idea where our we are not prepared for war times. And with our additional work handing over IOC, we will stress the security operation centers. And another threats outside or next to the indicators of compromise are the defending community itself. Like you see on the left side, that is one PowerShell dropper. The PowerShell dropper uses cryptography AES managed. The string is inside the dropper. And the detection rules, which was written, is publicly available and tells you what it detects. What did the attacker? He changed it. He encoded the string with base 64. And that was not detected any longer. And the new malware of the same actor was not seen. The same malware, we have a public release blog post. I looked into the blog post, and you see there's an MD5 hash for this specific PowerShell dropper. But the hash is wrong. If you look it up at VirusTotal, you will see high detection rate, but it's another tool used in the same attack, but is not the dropper of the first stage. So if you find the correct one, using the report, hunt for them, writing your own rules, you will see a few months later, or now years later, it has still the same detection rate. 3 of 60 AV engines can find it. And that is the problem. What we release should be have a quality measurement criteria. And also, security researchers like to publish their work. I think that's normal. But if you go back, VM Protect has code leaks in 2022 and 2023, and the latest partial code leak was in 2023. And there you see one researcher figured out, I think 1 week later, on the 16th of December, that there's a watermark included in VM Protect. It was released on one public site, and this was found by the company who develops VM Protect, and the watermark was removed 4 days later. With a new release from Saturday for the publishing the information to 40 days later. Of course, we have other threats as well. Many of them are known. I discussed a few of them. I want to highlight others, like the vulnerability research and exploit publication, because that depends how it can be utilized. Before I show it on the next slide, I will also talk about strong link between research and actions that it is missing sometimes. We released as Google Cloud Security Security Forecast 2024. And in this forecast, you can see, you will find old malware and ancient techniques in 2024. Sounds pretty easy. Everyone saw it. No one realized what it really meant, and implemented actions or derived actions are not taken. And that is what I mentioned before. If your war strategy does not work, or if you're an inferior party and have no sophistication level for modern, high sophisticated malware, you rely on old malware. And there were so many blog posts about it that it happened at the end of 2023 and a new rise of it in 2024. And of course, you have supporting, favoring groups like private sector companies. They are often forgotten as well. They have information. For example, if I write a good software which envelopes my code, and I'm asked, which company do you protect? I can tell it to the threat actor, to the nation state. And also, I can tell them if there is perhaps a possibility to reveal the code behind. And if that works and it is used by other malware authors as well, I have a complete new arsenal of additional malware attributed to completely different groups, not to the nation state itself. And of course, the war actor can hide behind other world events, like escalation conflicts on the other side of the world. To support it, to escalate them more, will move the eyes of the world to another place. And now I promised the other attack vectors of malware with exploit development in the last slide. And malware attacks, of course, systems or companies. But we have technical and non-technical targets. One non-technical target is the human way of thinking. If you think about that malware could be used as coin miner. You take a coin miner, you've seen the coin miner. You have a detection rule for a coin miner. Next time, the same coin miner, you say, oh, great, a coin miner again, no real actions to do. But next time you have the coin miner, it's detected as coin miner, including additional backdoor functionality. And because you know it is a coin miner, you do no additional actions. Also, if you have it attributed, your malware, that is only used in initial attack, that can also happen that is used as lateral movement. We have seen this with the Conti ransomware group. And it is really difficult to use another way of thinking. You can attack process with malware. Example is the exploit development. There, in this case, you attack the incident response process. You have the vulnerability. You know it is an exploit, and it will be patched in a few days. But you also know you do not have the capability in that time to weaponize the exploit to your malware. So what do? You hit the company first with a single malware, and that initiates the incident response process. And the most incident response processes are derived from frameworks. I know the frameworks. There you have evidence preservation, and don't make the attacker aware that he is spotted. So don't patch your systems. Now you have additional time to weaponize your malware and attack the company. There you attack the process. And of course, you have technical targets. You know all these anti-XXX techniques, anti-VM, anti-debugging, and so on. That is also, and I want to highlight two of them. This is enveloping with software protectors and the obfuscation techniques. And there, the obfuscation evolution. Simple step, you have obfuscation technique. You developed it, you put it in, you test it, then you use it, and there's a risk that is identified. After identification, you have to rethink and rework your obfuscation technique. You have to modify it. There are several ways. Adding additional obfuscation techniques to it, adding another dimension of your obfuscation technique. I will explain it in the next slide, what I mentioned or mean with dimension. You can change the size of the existing dimensions, and you can migrate to another obfuscation technique. But what do I mean with dimension? I think everyone knows code flattening. Code flattening is amazing. And the dimension is the size, how many switch cases you have, and or branches, and additional how long your code is. And you can change both. You can add more switch cases. You can add bogus code, which is never reached, that you can make it longer, and longer means more difficult for some analysis tools. You know some analysis tools? So, okay, 100,000 lines of code, okay. After that, it does not work well. So you can change it. And that is resizing the dimensions. But you could also add another dimension, because the initial state or the state variable is inside the code. Now you can say it is not only calculated inside that function, but in sub-functions called by the function, so that you have another dimension in the depth. Or you can add additional complexity, that this third dimension depends on other flattening functions before. There's a global variable set by the prior functions. And that makes it difficult. And that is developed by war parties before the war, and I have to handle it during the war. And that is quite difficult, so we have to prepare. And some of the preparation methods are, how can I recognize malware? I think everyone who is working with malware knows similarity methods for malware. You can use them. There is binary and raw data similarity. There is code level similarity, where you look at the code itself, take the function or basic blocks, compare them, and then you have more knowledge on it. Or you can use similarity on the built infrastructure. That means you take the rich header hash. I know everyone will tell me, oh, the rich header hash is old, it has not worked well, Olympic destroyer, and so on. I know this story. But you can use the rich header and correlate it to the rest of the file. And if that fits, you can extract parts out of it and look with similarity algorithms if there are similarity to other building infrastructures of code. So you can spot not the same malware, but the same author behind. Another approach of similarity. And I added something which I called descriptive similarity. Descriptive similarity it describes where all the similar ideas happen in the code, like the DLL main is patched. Then from there, it jumps into the C runtime code created by the compiler. And there is the malicious function. That is another similarity approach. And every similarity approach has, or should be, you should know how to use it to avoid mistakes. There are so many mistakes outside with similarity approaches. And that brings us, how can I describe it? I think everyone knows different descriptive methods for malware capabilities and behavior. One is the attack metrics from MITRE. MITRE is great. But in this case, I have a description how it looks like only in this one, the usage of the malware in this one attack. And it does not describe what it is doing in detail. And sometimes it is more easy, and because not correct usage of framework will have loss of context in the consequence. One, how I can detect it. I talked about, everyone is thinking about how I can detect malware. And there's Yara rules outside. Every company writes his Yara rules. Everyone loves Yara rules because they are great. And I took the 5 rules of 5 big vendors and matched it against a data set. To create the data set was quite difficult, and I matched one rule match. It was 18.5% to 28%. It's quite low. Only 25% of a data set was hit by a rule. Then I looked at the 2% overlap and the 5% overlap, and matched it back to the data set, the 5% overlap. And then it was only 2.5% hit. And that means I can only spot 2.5% if I'm free in my choice of the company who creates the rule. If I create it randomly, these 2.5% are the rules I will hit every time. I think the actual way of working everyone knows. If someone wants to have the slides at the end, please send me an email or ask me on LinkedIn. I will send it over.
Richard? Yeah, you need to wrap up.
Okay, yeah. Can I wrap it up?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes. I think all about is talking before, but my opinion is that don't prepare for tomorrow, but for the day after tomorrow. Because if you plan to prepare for tomorrow, tomorrow is then when you prepared, and then you are hit, then it is too late. That is one. And the second one is know your limits. Also as company, tell everyone about the limits, and then develop the detections for tomorrow, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I will quickly ask a question, and then I would like to take a question also from the audience. Carlos is also helping me with identifying and handing out the microphone. While you think of the question and raise the hand and Carlos identifies, I will ask the question to you. You talked about, Richard, about the quality of the IOCs, right?
Yes.
How can that be ensured? Do we need to engage that the security companies and threat intelligence talk to each other, verify each other IOCs? What's your vision, how the quality can be assured?
At the moment, the quality, every company uses the blog posts which are publicly available and checks it again and again for his own intelligence platform. So I think the talking between the companies could help because it is identified, but then you should reflect it back to the company itself who published the blog post. And the company itself has to take care of that it is maintained and changed, because if you talk back and it is not changed, it's also not helpful.
So talking you're working in the field. Are you saying that the security companies don't talk to each other, or it's just not very well developed? There are companies that talk, but...
Yeah, we talk with each other, but it is not in that way. We should have to take care that it is done to prepare for the war times.
I see.
So we have to increase the working together.
Or, I see. A question? All right. While we wait for the questions, maybe the other panelists have the question as well.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned attribution a couple of times, which I understand is the science to associate a particular malware to a threat actor, for instance.
Yes.
By doing, I know, rich header analysis or analyzing the concrete obfuscation methods that are being used and stuff like that. I wonder how hard is attribution actually, because, I mean, that's an often raised question. And since that is not enough, from time to time, people are talking about so-called false flag campaigns, where one attacking group imitates the behavior of the malware of another attacking group. How realistic is that actually?
Attribution at war times is much more hard than in the normal times, because they will exchange the toolset in between. And if you say that this toolset was seen before by another threat group and now it is used by a nation state, if you do attribution, it could lead in the wrong direction. But I think, my personal opinion, probably not the company opinion, is that attribution matters, but not at the beginning of the war. There it is more important to identify the malware itself, to work against it, to define countermeasures. But attribution, yes, it is quite hard. It's a real scientific work, and I like it because it is science.
I see.
Konstantinos, please.
Yes, well, thank you for the talk, Richard. That was very interesting. I will follow up on the question on cyber attack attribution, and I will go a bit beyond your presentation, actually.
Yes.
And so beyond descriptive similarities to identify malware, are you considering other angles, other dimensions additional to this work so that you can, derive attribution?
I try to repeat it. Do I use or research other concepts for attribution except the code similarity or the similarity approaches itself? Yes, of course. We try to figure out specific ideas of obfuscation techniques and software protectors and look if there are ways to use it for attribution. Because if one actor is using a really novel custom obfuscation technique, I try to track it and to define the specific criteria to measure it.
And what about beyond technical measures? Because I've talked to a couple of competitors of yours, and probably you do something similar. You include, for example, geopolitical information along with the other analysis.
Other teams of us, yes. I'm only the reverse engineer. I feel sorry, I'm only the technical
don't
guy.
Say only.
But we have in our company persons who look on code language similarities, for example, in phishing emails, to find linguistic specifica used only by a certain group. So there are other approaches as well, far beyond the technical ones.
All right. All right, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Let's give another round of applause. We have to honor the time, and every speaker gets 30 minutes, but you are encouraged to catch the speakers afterwards, even during the event tonight, and talk to them. Now, the next speaker is Florian, and he's leading the cybersecurity research program at the Austrian Institute of Technology. Well, his primary focus is machine learning and everything related to this already for a very long time. He also has 3 kids, and linked or not linked, he also likes to go shoot guns in a fire range. So please, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for the introduction. So I'm also very happy to present to you today our work on the application of natural language processing for OSINT analysis. Specifically, we are working on an open source project that is called Taranis AI, and I'm going to introduce you into this open source project and hopefully raise your interest in it. Let's get straight to the point. What is open source intelligence? I guess everyone in this room basically has an understanding what OSINT is, but just to be on the same page, we define it as the collection and analysis of data that is gathered from open sources to produce actionable intelligence. And you can distinguish different kinds of cyber threat intelligence. The literature says there are 3, 5, or 7 types. We keep it simple. We say that basically 2 types. The one is the technical cyber threat intelligence. So this is everything you know about indicators of compromise, like URIs, registry keys, hash sums, process names, and stuff like that. So everything that you could automatically fetch and put into your detective solutions or into your preventive solutions and then feel secure. So this is the one kind, and this is actually the kind I'm not talking about today. I like to talk about the second kind, which we call soft CTI. Soft because it's unstructured text that comes in various formats from various sources. So these are the typical internet pages that you consult, security tickers, vendor lists, mailing lists, social media forums, hacker forums, and stuff like that, so that you get informed about new threat actors, new security products, about breaches, incidents, ongoing campaigns, also vulnerabilities, although there are different sources for that, of course, patches, mitigations, etc., etc. Also, things like new laws that might concern you, new security standards are distributed via these sources. And these are the sources that also our stakeholders, for instance, the Austrian CERT, the national CERT, that they monitor on a daily basis. These are lots of sources. So for instance, baseline here, they monitor around 250 sources a day, and each source emits a couple of articles per day. And there are some analysts who skim through all the articles to try to find out what is actually relevant for them and their stakeholders. So what is it good for? Why do they do that? In order to inform the stakeholders. So they produce so-called products. So at the end of an OSINT cycle, there's always a product. So you create an advisory, a summary, you satisfy some intelligence requirements, and then you distribute that. And the challenge here is that the number of OSINT sources is massive, of course. The number of news items is even higher. And the art is now to grasp quickly what is actually relevant and omit the rest. So you need to filter out repetitive content. You need to filter out stuff that is not relevant for you. So you could say actually the workflow is pretty similar to what a journalist does, but you do it for the cybersecurity sector. And of course, we are not the first ones who face that problem. That's a pretty common problem. And there are already tools out there that help you with that, also open source tools. And I would like to mention specifically 2 of them, Taranis Free and Taranis NG, which are both great tools to do exactly that. So they ingest raw data from, raw unstructured data from various sources and formats, so from email lists or social media or web pages. And then they drop all of that into a consistent database and make it searchable for a human analyst. And the human analyst would go through this list, so gathers all the items, assesses it in a first round, analyzes in more depth, and then publish the results. So that's the established Taranis workflow. How is it used by many national CERTs today? And we thought we could improve that process, specifically by putting some NLP magic on top of it to relieve the human analyst from some repetitive tasks. So we'll come to the specific features in a minute, just to give you an overview. So what we do, or what, let's better say, Taranis AI does, it extracts relevant named entities from the natural text sources. So it says, for instance, this is a company that was affected, this is a vendor, this is a product, this is a location, stuff like that, and associates tags to the news items. It clusters news items, so it establishes relations between different news items. So, for instance, imagine that there is some ongoing incident out there, or there's a vulnerability that is being actively exploited, then everyone talks about it, and every source reports about it, and Taranis AI simply clusters all these news items so that an analyst only needs to go through this information once. We create summaries of the whole clusters, for instance, or we create summaries of longer articles. We're doing this by using NLP. We create recommendations, so this is an important thing. So we can recommend articles based on articles that have been deemed relevant in the past. So analysts can actively upvote, for instance, articles, and the system tries to find out what are the common properties of all the upvoted articles, and can then suggest other articles in the future. And we can support, and Tyrannis AI, let's better say, supports with creating OSINT products. So that means formulating the final report in a language that is appropriate for the receiver. So yeah, together with our stakeholders, we ran through a lengthy process of finding out the concrete requirements, and we identified now at the end 5 user stories that you could see summarized here. First one is, imagine an analyst comes to a shift in the morning, turns on the computer, logs into Tyrannis AI, and simply wants to know, with any specific intelligence requirements, wants to know what are the hot topics out there, what is it that everyone talks about. Simple dashboard view that identifies the hot topics. Second user story is an analyst knows some entity, has already some hunch, some clue, knows about something about a vulnerability, a malware, or a company, and would like to know what does the outside world know about that, what is already publicly available. User story 3, an analyst read through an interesting article and simply wants to know what else is out there that is related to that article. So are there any other sources that report more than this article contains? User story 4 then brings more context into play. So there's a specific mission, for instance. It's more in a military setting. A mission that uses some particular IT services, for instance, or is carried out in a specific region, and you would like to know what is relevant for that particular mission context, what OSINT is out there. And user story 5 is that an analyst already now has some findings and would need to report these findings to the ultimate receiver, and would like to get some support in formulating the findings in a way that they are effectively understandable for the receiver. So just to give you a better impression how that looks like, so this is the main user interface of Tyrannis AI. You can see here on the right side here a couple of news items that have been collected. So those are the small boxes here. You can see from which sources those items come from, when they have been published, what is the author, if the gathering bot was able to extract that from the news item. So you can see here news items from Bleeping Computers, for instance, from the Dutch CERT, if I'm not misleading, from FeedBurner, from the Register, and so on. And Tyrannis AI finds out that all these items are actually very closely related, because they all report about a certain vulnerability that has been found and actively exploited in WSFTP. So it merges those together and creates a high-level story out of it, which means it summarizes what these single articles are about. It associates some tags using named entity recognition and says which CVEs are linked to the information that is given here below, which companies, which products, which people, things like that. It associates a relevance score, which is, I like to say, automatically generated, depending on your configuration. So it tries to find out how many or which properties are shared with articles that have been deemed relevant in the past, which have been upvoted by an analyst, or which have been added to a report. And it also takes into account how many news items actually report about that event. And then at the end, you have here an advanced search bar on the left side. That's no rocket science at all, but it's just a combination of using named entity recognition, using free text search, and using advanced filters. So you can filter for a time span, for instance, and use some of the flags here, like what has been seen as important by others, and what is similar to something that has been seen in the past, and things like that, to drill down to what is actually of interest to the analyst. So if we briefly go through the features, just to give you more insights into how they work. So named entity recognition, it's important to understand that this is more than simple tagging. It seeks to locate and classify named entities in unstructured text and also associates categories. So it's not about only the keywords that are relevant, but it also tells you what type this keyword is of. Like, as I said, this is a company, this is a person, this is a location. Those are pretty standard things. And we extended it with cybersecurity related concepts, like we can identify what is an APT group, for instance, what is an IT asset, what is an IT vendor, things like that. Here is an example of this. So you have here the first few lines of a story, and it associates here then several tags to that story, and you can see on first sight, okay, this is obviously something about Fortinet, because it mentions Fortinet here. It mentions also some products like FortiOS, FortiProxy, FortiWeb. It mentions some countries, China, Russia, for instance. It mentions here an APT group, and so on. So an analyst could see on first sight, okay, this might be relevant or it might not be relevant for the task that he has to carry out. For instance, if the task is identify anything that is relevant for their own company, and their own company doesn't use Fortinet products, this is likely something that an analyst would dismiss. So the advanced search and filtering, as I said, no rocket science at all, but an important piece. What is actually relevant here that we're currently working on that goes beyond the state of the art is that we are introducing collaborative search and filtering. So we found out that there's not only a single analyst, of course, that works and that searches the database and works on the database, but usually you have a group of analysts and they need to coordinate among themselves somehow. So if one analyst, for instance, already read an article or found an article useful, that should or should not be shown to another analyst. That depends on the individual workflow. This is something that needs careful tuning, but it's important that we offer the capability to share, for instance, search queries and also steer the filtering based on preferences of analysts. Relevance ranking, this is actually a real neat feature. So the simplest form of relevance ranking is that analysts can upvote and downvote articles, and then the system in the backend analyzes what are the commonalities of all the articles that have been upvoted over the past. And then it finds out certain common properties, for instance. In the simplest form, this could be that the algorithm finds out that articles from a particular source are always seen as relevant. So this might be a high-quality source, and articles in the future from that source are then more relevant than other articles from other sources. But articles can also share other properties. So eventually, in the backend, there runs a machine learning algorithm that tells us what properties do good articles have in common and what sources deliver such items. This was part of another research project that we integrated here. Summary and report creation means that we can summarize complex stories because there is nothing more frustrating for an analyst than going through an article for minutes just to find out at the end that the article is actually irrelevant. So we create short summaries based on the named entities that we extracted. So the analyst can then better decide, is it worth to go through the whole article or not? And we can help the analyst to fill in the final report by formulating and rephrasing the findings. Topic and story clustering, I mentioned that briefly. So news items that belong together, that report about the same event, for instance, they go together into one story. So this is also another example here that you can see. The story here is that the Signal Messenger was equipped with some quantum-resistant encryption. That was already last year. Different sources report about that. They all do it in a different manner. They all have different titles. They all phrase the text differently. But anyway, the algorithm finds out that this is all about the same stuff. So there's no need for an analyst to go over all the single items, but just go over that story. And this is a really required feature because if there is a high impact event, for instance, then an analyst would go over hundreds of articles that all basically report about the same stuff. So technology-wise, Taranis AI is an open source project. It's hosted on GitHub. It's fully transparent. We also do all the developments on GitHub, so there is a CI/CD pipeline. You can see all the open issues there. You can contribute there, which I would like to encourage you highly to do that. So you can, if you try it out, Taranis AI, you can open issues there. You can even send us pull requests. We're happy for any contribution we get. And we try to keep the barrier as low as possible to contribute, which means there's a Docker Compose file, for instance. You can simply download it and get it up and running within a couple of minutes, I would say. There are pre-configured sources so that the bots in the background collect your data that you can actually try it out. From an architecture point of view, we use a very loosely coupled and modular architecture. So there are a couple of bots in the background that do the NLP stuff. So there's a bot that captures, that gathers the content from a source. Depending on the source, the different bots, of course. And then there are further bots that refine the content, for instance, extract named entities, do the story clustering, create summaries. We even have a bot that maps articles to MITRE ATAC techniques using the ATAC BERT model, which is obviously a BERT language model. And you can create further bots, you can exchange the bots. Since it's loosely coupled with well-defined interfaces, that's actually quite easy to set up and it's quite modular. So far about the solutions. We applied now the solution together with our stakeholders in a productive setting, and there are a couple of lessons learned, a couple of hard lessons learned, to be honest, at some point. First lesson learned is the need for high-quality gathering. This is something we heavily underestimated, because if you gather sources, you might get a lot of polluting text. So think of web pages with commercials and banners, cookie disclaimers, headers, footers, sidebars, menu select, language select menus, and things like that. This is not that much of a problem if a human analyst reads through the text, because the human analyst just ignores the additional text that is not relevant. But if you use NLP, then that's a problem. So we tuned a lot the gathering bots, also to get along with these various formats. In best case, your source delivers an RSS feed and everything is fine. If it doesn't, then it becomes nasty. So also lazy loading on HTML pages is a problem, and you would be surprised what people can do with CSS, for instance, and how web pages could look like. So the data gathering process is important to get this straight. There's a need for adaptable and flexible workflows. So we spent a lot of time in the beginning to find out how the analysts would use our solution in the future. Then we squeezed the software and brought it into a shape that it is usable that way. And then we found out actually everyone is using the software a bit differently, because analysis teams are organized differently, depending on whether analysts work on the same database, but they have, for instance, different intelligence requirements or satisfy different intelligence requirements, or they have the same intelligence requirements but work on different parts and different chunks of the data. So they need to coordinate their work somehow. And we implemented mechanisms to allow them to do that. Then, about the AI-produced results. Many people think using AI makes the human, well, or you can spare the human from a lot of work if you use AI, that's true, but the human isn't useless in this whole process. Quite the opposite, it's indispensable that you have the human in the whole loop, because the AI delivers great results up to a certain barrier, I would say, but then you need the human in order to give high-quality feedback, because just with feedback, the AI in the background can be retrained, and you can optimize the AI in the background. So think of, like, for instance, news items get clustered that actually do not belong together, or named entities are extracted from a text which are actually useless for the text. Then you need to have the possibility to give that feedback to the system that it doesn't do the same mistakes in the future. And similarly, the recommender system needs to be tuned on a regular basis. So as I said, the system can recommend articles, for instance, based on common properties, based on properties that these articles share with previous articles. But here explainability is key, because from a mathematical point of view, it's not always that clear what properties were used in order to determine the similarity. So if you think of like common recommender systems, algorithms like principal component analysis or support vector machines, then it's not that easy to explain how the model came to the conclusion and how the model came to the result that it delivers. So explainability and transparency is key here in order to improve the model over time. Yeah, there are lots of challenges ahead of us. We are further developing Taranis AI, also in course of several European Defense Fund projects. So the funding is secured for the next years, and we have lots of ideas how to improve it. Since time is running, I will skip most of that. I just wanted to say there are a couple of things which are relevant and interesting for you, I suppose. For instance, the automatic notification of emerging threats. So this is a use case that we actively pursue in one of the EDF projects. And the idea is here that we do sentiment analysis on social media posts, which is not that new. but we do it in context of some specific entities. For instance, you could specify names, companies, nation states, and things like that, and then you monitor social media posts and find out whether these entities are discussed in a negative, in a positive, or neutral emotional tone, because that might hint you to emerging threats. Yeah, but I must not skip that slide, because those are the guys who pay our bills. So the software was developed in course of a research project called Awake. It's a TEF project. It's almost over now, but as I said, there are European Defence Fund projects that further will financially support our work, namely the projects USINF and Newsroom. We're actively collaborating with our national CERT, with the Ministry of the Interior, our Ministry of Defense, with other national CERTs, for instance, the Slovakian CERT, who are the original maintainer of Taranis NG, which is the basis for our Taranis AI, where we hard forked from. And there on the bottom, you can find the webpage of Taranis AI, where you can also find the link to the GitHub repository. Last but not least, I have to say, this is all not the effort of a single person, of course. It's a team effort. This is the team behind Taranis AI, quite a considerable amount of people, and they are all working hard to further improve the solution. Thanks a lot for your attention.
All right, thank you. Let's have a chat. Of course, questions are welcome from the audience. Carlos will keep a watchful eye, but in the meantime, I would like to monetize or monopolize on my position to ask the first question. You already touched upon the dynamic nature of the internet and the text that you can have. There are a lot of noise around that you have to actually can extract the actual meaning of the data. And it's not only the extraction part, but it's also configuring the workers that can actually go and extract the data. It doesn't happen automatically. What are the challenges linked to this, and how you overcome those?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because we spend an awful amount of time doing that. So as I said, or as you actually now repeated, there is a lot of noise in internet pages. Ideally, you have a clean source, you have an RSS feed, then you just get the metadata that you would like to have. If you don't have that, you need to be creative. For most pages, you can specify basically what are the elements in the DOM, in the document object model, what are the elements that are of interest to you, then you can specify an XPath, for instance, in the gathering pod, and you're fine. Of course, that might change over time, so you need to stay ahead and revise if needed. But then there are some, I would say, nasty web pages that use, for instance, lazy loading and things like that. Then you need to simulate a browser. You can do this, for instance, with Selenium. You need to simulate the browser, you need to simulate a human, you need to scroll through the text and capture the text. In the worst case, you need to screen scrape the text, like a screen capture, and further process it. So there are lots of challenges ahead, yes.
All right, if I don't see yet a hand, I will continue. So I think the one that you mentioned as well is the building the stories, so that there are multiple sources that you collect, you cluster them together, and then the story is being developed and evolved as new sources are there. So the question here is how those stories are being developed or evolved as soon as new sources come in, and if there's a weight mechanism to say, okay, this one is more important than the other. You already touched upon upvoting and downvoting. How would you more touch upon this, how these stories are being created?
Yeah, so there is an incremental clustering algorithm in the background that every couple of minutes goes through the new news items that come in. So news items are collected on a continuous basis. Then the algorithm goes over these new news items that came in and tries to associate the news items with existing clusters. Then there are a couple of thresholds you can configure, because at some point, if clusters get too large, you can split up clusters and recluster the news items. Because there's no use if you say you have a cluster that contains like 200 news items and they are just loosely coupled. Then you start to split up clusters and which just contain those news items that are most related to each other. But there is an iterative model in the background that does it automatically and should actually hide that complexity from the analyst. An analyst can still upvote and downvote a story to give the system feedback whether the story is appropriate, usable, or not.
Hello, Ilir Daka from National CERT in Albania. I just want to ask you something about the sources that you use. Are these sources configured, or they are pre-configured, or dynamically how you use them? So if I have another source that maybe would be let's say a custom source, can it be configured in the background or in the interface?
Yes. Of course, you can configure the sources by specifying the URI. That's it. That's freely doable. There are a couple of pre-configured sources, but not much, to be honest. We have currently configured 160 sources. We will configure more, but they're not preset. You can configure the sources on yourself, and you can configure the URI. You can configure the protocol that is being used. You can even use web pages that need authentication. So the bot can do that. You can set the user credentials so that you get the sources, or an API token or something like that. And you can specify then on the web page, for instance, if you refer to the web collector, you can specify what is the actual relevant part on the web page. As I said, you can specify an XPath, for instance. Yeah, so that's completely freely configurable. If you'd like to try it out, please give it a try. Don't hesitate to come back to us if you have troubles with configuring a source, especially if it's an open source, so publicly available. We are also happy to assist you with that.
Any questions from the audience more? All right, while we're waiting for questions, maybe there's a question from the panel as well. Konstantinos?
Thank you for the presentation. This is a very interesting tool. I think you touched upon my question already a bit. So you mentioned that it's relatively easy to download it and have it up and running, right? But in order to extract the most out of the tool, like how practical would that be? How much time would we need in our team, for example, at the university to do so?
Yeah, I think it depends what you intend to achieve and how deep you want to go into the rabbit hole. But I mean, spinning up a machine, and that's basically a Docker container, getting it up and running, it's a matter of, I would say, 20 minutes. To make yourself familiar with the user interfaces, another couple of minutes. There are also some wiki pages on our GitHub page. There's also a getting started tutorial. So really, I think the barrier is pretty low and it's pretty self-explaining, especially if you're already familiar with Taranis NG, you will find yourself in a familiar environment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so one more question from my side. You mentioned the tonality. You can extract the tonality and understand if it's aggressive towards you, or it's whatever the emotions are conveyed there. I would like you to explain maybe a little bit more how it links to the operational perspective and what we can get out of this. And most likely it also links to the language support. What are the languages are supported? How can we enhance it or expand the languages that Taranis AI is supporting?
Yeah, language support, I'm happy you brought up the question. Language support is an important thing, especially in this community and especially in Europe where we have different languages, many different languages. The languages are configurable, so you can exchange the language model that the bot uses that extracts the entities. Currently, in the default configuration, there's a bot that understands English, of course, for international sources, and in our case, German. But you can easily exchange that model. The models are freely available, so we also use currently just the standard models from Hugging Face. So you can download there your preferred language model, can configure it. Again, I offer the same support. If someone is interested in doing that and has troubles doing that, just come back to us. It's important for us also to understand where the problems lie and also that we better understand what are the hurdles of adopting the solution. But actually, it's pretty easily extensible in that regard.
Right, and the emotional value of the text that is extracting.
This is a different bot we are currently working on. It's not in the public release yet. That's part of the research project that I mentioned. Again, sentiment analysis is something that is out there since a couple of years. We are now doing the integration work for social media posts in Taranis AI and hope that we have finished that soon.
All right. Well, thank you, Florian. Let's have another round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you.
Well, the next one is Konstantinos. So he's a professor at Royal Holloway University of London, who he likes to sail and also do paddle boarding, but he has not yet tried it in River Thames because it's just too brown and you don't know what you can get.
Oh, I have tried it. That's why I'm not going to do it again.
I mean, he's actually a very true Greek because he produces his own olive oil as well while being away in the UK. So there you go. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, baby. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here in this excellent international community. So my topic we will discuss today is human aspects of cybersecurity within the context of maritime. So this is, let me start. This is the rough structure of the discussion today. We'll be talking about maritime cybersecurity, and we will be dividing the approach into two rough, oversimplified, of course, categories, attackers and defenders. So then we will examine a bit the characteristics and challenges within maritime, and then the core of the presentation is around human aspects. Finally, we need to have some sort of solutions. So the solutions are actually diversified between attackers and defenders. And the one is going to be behavior change, and the other one is going to be attacker profiling. So the solution here actually complements what Richard talked about with hard CDI, if you allow me the term, and more soft CDI maybe that Florian mentioned. All right, so maritime cybersecurity, when we talk about this, the environment includes ships, enterprise centers, and also ports. And you have seen recent incidents that have happened. So the Baltimore incident and the Suez Canal incident. Now, these are reportedly not cyber attacks, but the point here is that this is what can be caused from a potential cyber attack there. And we know that globally, supply chains and international commerce relies to maritime to a degree of up to 95%, 90% or something like this. So with regards to critical infrastructure, it's terribly important. All right, so some characteristics of maritime cybersecurity. So, okay, cyber threats evolve very rapidly, we know that. But we have an environment here which doesn't necessarily change very easily. So you have systems on ships which are quite old, a lot of legacy systems. It's not unusual to have Windows XP running on several systems on a ship. And then we have an additional issue with maritime, which is regulations and guidelines. So you have different regulations across different parts of the world, and that can be problematic because companies are focusing a lot of effort and time and resources there, and probably also on the operational nature of the environment, thus potentially not focusing on security too much. All right, there is IT and OT within maritime. That's a big problem that needs to be disentangled, and it's not clear how the systems are separated in a lot of cases. And we have reports that several groups within the sector do not receive proper training, if they receive training at all. And we also know that there is a specific ethos or culture within the sector, long hours and shifts and things like that, if we're talking about ships in particular. So these reduce the opportunities for additional training. And then you have other characteristics like entertainment on ships, bring your own device, what is the connection there, how you can update systems and so on. All right, so this is a general situation issue with cybersecurity. The defenders have to make sure that all points of the attack surface are covered to an agreed degree, okay, that is considered reasonable, whereas attackers have the opportunity to find one point of entry. Okay, so this can be opportunistic, it can be funded and supported with tremendous resources, and they can only do it once. So there is an asymmetry here. So, talking about the human aspects, these are the 5 categories of human aspects that I would like to indicate, and we have identified these based on their significance. And see if you can try to spot the differences between attackers and defenders. They are exactly identical, and the reason is that we're talking about humans here. It's the same underlying principles, it's the same observed behaviors. So a lot of insights come from psychology, cognitive psychology, and behavioral economics here. However, the solutions and the approaches on these might be different because we have different environments. So I will talk about this in more detail now. So first of all, we have bounded rationality. This is a theory created by Herbert Simon, an economist in the 60s. The idea is we're not fully rational, we're not AI, and the reason is we have limited time and resources. That's true for people in the industry there. We have only partial access to information at any given point. We do not know. I mean, for any real world problem, you cannot have all information, okay? So that has an influence on your decisions. And then finally, we don't have necessarily the cognitive capacity to, due to fatigue and due to other issues and to being overwhelmed, for example, in an environment, to deal with the problem. So our decisions are bounded and rational. And then we have one of the key points that I want to mention here is the cultural aspect, and which is missing from current approaches. We have culture. So I will be mentioning 14 dimensions. They slightly overlap. There are other models, but this is what we have been using. This is widely accepted, both of them actually. So the first 8 variables include how a culture, this can be organizational culture, this can be national culture, and they are related actually. So how is trust established within an environment? Okay, you have cultures where trust is based more on tasks and your performance, or you have relationship-based trust. Then you have the degree to which disagreement is tolerated within an environment. Communication, high context, low context. This means how you start an email, for example. Do you say other stuff before you get to the point? This sort of issue. There are more nuanced cultures of communication. Japan, for example, is an example of this. So deciding top-down and consensus-oriented, evaluating, providing direct feedback. So in the West in general, if you have noticed, we tend to provide, if we have negative feedback, we tend to start with a positive one and then move to the negative. That's not true for all Western countries, but it's largely true. So scheduling has to do with linear or flexible times, leading, egalitarian, and hierarchical. This is connected with deciding, actually. We will see this in the next slide as well. And persuading. That's interesting because you have cultures when an argument, in order to be successfully persuasive, needs to start with applications. For example, US and UK are in this category, whereas other European countries would start with the principles. And interestingly, this is reflected in the legal systems of these countries and territories. So the next set of dimensions here is this. Power distance overlaps with deciding and leading, as we mentioned earlier. Masculinity, femininity, because I will touch upon this a bit later, has to do with how competitive an environment is, or a society, or a group, and whether achievement is appreciated as a high, is valued highly. Uncertainty avoidance has to do with how comfortable people are with uncertain situations, or how much they prefer stability. Individualism, collectivism, pretty straightforward. Long-term orientation and short-term has to do with the eagerness for change or accepting change within groups and societies. And finally, indulgence versus restraint, it's pretty straightforward. So an example of this, based on some research we have done, this was on the ransomware group Conti, because we have the data sets from their internal communications, is the following. We identified power distance and collectivism, which is related to another construct, connectedness. Let me give you an example of constructs here. you can have ideology, right? So ideology can be constructed from several other variables. For example, you can have high power distance, so how much authority is respected within a society, and you can have high levels of uncertainty avoidance, and you can have high levels of restraint, and plus collectivism. So all these together can indicate that you have some ideological context within this group. Okay, so this is the way to do this sort of analysis. Now, if you identify from other studies such as this one that there is a negative correlation between individualism and power distance, and you identify that you have high power distance index, then you can probably assume or derive what the levels of individualism are. So here, for example, you see Estonia, Lithuania, Finland, and Luxembourg being a group of countries with relatively more individualism than the average, and also being a bit to the lower, so power distance is the x-axis, right, to the lower side of power distance. Okay, so personality is the next component that we talk about, and it's divided based on this model. There are, again, other models. It's hard to find things that are uniquely identified and used in academia and research. So the first one is the so-called Big Five, or OCEAN, out of its initials. It's the first personality domain, as we say, is openness to experience, how much people appreciate ideas and art, abstract ideas and art. Then we have conscientiousness, broken down into, each of these is broken down into 2 personality facets, right? In total, giving us 10. So, and then we have extroversion, neuroticism, and agreeableness. Okay, and the point here is that all these give us combinations which can derive what we call dark personality traits. There's a theory that talks about the dark triad, and another one which is, well, expanded now to the dark tetrad. Okay, and these are the components: psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and the fourth one is potentially sadism, depending on, on the studies, or status-driven risk-taking. So what's the point here? We can identify and predict criminal activities or criminal behavior based on these characteristics here, okay? Yeah, let's leave it there. So, for our purposes. All right, so then we have the risk attitudes, which you see here that are slightly diversified between attackers and defenders. So, for defenders, personnel, employees, and insiders. Okay, why this is important is the following reason. Compliance and acceptance of security policies and procedures, or whatever is conveyed at security level, depends on the level of risk attitude of the recipients. Then for attackers, the argument goes back to the dark personality traits and personality in more broadly, and it indicates that impulsivity, low self-control, and risk-seeking behavior are good predictors. Now, there's an additional issue here because criminologically, these theories and findings have been defined around traditional crimes mostly. So we are not sure, we do not know, it's an ongoing research to what extent they apply to cyber criminals. And the final one is the skill set. So this can include technical skills, communications, knowledge of security policies. In the case of defenders, it has to do with the why, which is kind of important in any environment. So if employees know why they have to follow some practice, they're more likely to get involved. This creates agency. They're more likely to take responsibilities and create an environment of trust and security culture. Education and training is equally applicable to both. And then for the attacker specifically, I want to highlight this one: collaboration, group formation, and maintaining of networks, because we have very common ransomware as a service today, or crime or cybercrime as a service. And the question is, what kind of people, what kind of groups have the skills, and what are these skills in the first place to be forming, maintaining these affiliated groups, probably across several countries and nations, right? And how do they do this? So that's a unique characteristic and skill. All right, so what do we do from here? Two approaches. The one is for attackers and the one is for defenders. So for defenders, we have the opportunity to have the information from within. Okay, so what we can do is design approaches which will actually change the behaviors of individuals and make them into desirable, secure behaviors. So security awareness training as a term might be incomplete because, okay, somebody might be aware of the issues, but it doesn't mean that they follow the specific behavior. That's not manifested. We need something observable, and we need an action, okay? So that's how we minimize the human attack surface. And then for attackers, the proposal here as a solution is that we complement existing cyber threat intelligence with attacker profiling. And the profiling is going to be based on these human aspect components. All right, so behavioral interventions in order to do behavior change. There are several theories here. I'm going to present one, which is called fear appeals, but there are other ways. Maybe you have heard of nudge theory or boost theory or non-conscious approaches, but this is an example of how we can do things. So imagine that you want to send a message within your company or organization, and you want to make users, change their behavior of something simple. So for example, use stronger passwords. What do? You convey a message and you say, well, this is the likelihood that your password will be broken, and this is the impact if this happens. And you have been trained and you know what to do. And our solution is good enough. So that's self-efficacy and response efficacy. So the problem now, if it's a problem, because this is actually the reality, is that every individual will perceive and internalize this in a different fashion, in a subjective fashion. So maybe they think that they don't have the self-efficacy to do so. They're not capable, that's how they feel. And then maybe they think that the solution is not good enough. That's response efficacy, okay?
5 minutes.
Yep, thank you. And also maybe they perceive likelihood differently, because it's quite interesting how differently we perceive the same objective probabilities. All right, so if this is conveyed in a targeted way to the audience by appropriate individuals with appropriate framing and language and so on, maybe you get a rejection of the message if it's not successful, so users are not willing to comply with this, or you get protection motivation, which is that the message is successful and it's accepted, and then the recipients follow the proposed behavior. And then, on the other side, we have the solution for the attackers, which is attacker profiling. As far as I'm concerned, there is only one single attempt for a framework for profiling cyber criminals, and in my humble opinion, is incomplete. It's actually quite old now, but you have all these factors to consider, ranging from biological factors of the attackers to the external environment, and then there are all these subcomponents here. Mainly, culture has not been considered in the past, and I think it's really a gap. There's really a gap and an opportunity here. So then you can derive motivation, you can derive what sort of targets attackers select, or observe these, by the way, and get all this information. So this increases our understanding and potentially, increases our chances of cyber attack attribution and also potentially prediction of attacks. Okay, so in summary, I'm a bit early. I hope it's okay. I'm sure it's okay for all of you. In summary, two approaches across this dichotomy, right? First of all, we have individualized. This can be technical. We have been developing this, by the way, technological solutions like machine learning based assistance for personnel in weird situations and difficult situations to get information so that they can use whenever is needed and whenever they want to. And on the other hand, a data collection and analysis for the attacker side. And this can lead to cybersecurity behavior change, and the other one can lead to cybercriminal profiling so that we can hopefully minimize the human attack surface and be in a position to understand, mitigate, predict, or attribute cyber attacks. So thank you very much for your attention. If you're interested in the topic, please contact me, preferably on LinkedIn, because the email is flooded. So again, thank you very much for your attention, and it's great to be here.
Thank you. I will expect also questions from the audience, but in the meantime, so you were talking about the attacker profiling and extraction of the personality traits, like dark traits. How would you approach that? Do you tap into the chat channels? How do you grab the information? What would be the process?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you. So ideally, we would have access real time, right? And I think you touched upon these things in the previous discussions. We have not achieved that yet at research level. So at the moment, we're working on given data sets, but it's the same principle. And if the process is automated, this can be very, very fast. Of course, we need to have margins of success. And these things are, again, it's not a binary thing. It's not a yes or no, but you can estimate percentages of this and that variable and combinations of them. So I think it's not the next step, it's the current step now.
Right, I mean, you would most likely analyze the language that's being used in those forums or wherever you tap in. How would that be approached? In our discussion, you said it's going to be an additional abstraction layer, you translate it to the English language, yes, then added on top of it. Can you explain more?
So, I mean, you're right. At the moment, what we've done is for this, the data set that I mentioned was in Russian, although quite luckily, I would say not all the individuals within the group were Russians or Russian-speaking individuals originally. So we translated this. We used several Python libraries, and we checked with native speakers. And then, we found better databases on the translation. So that's an open question. I think it works pretty well. It has to do also with the context of the discussion, because if you heard short messages, for example, you don't have too much space for slang and notions that can be misinterpreted, okay? So it's like, I sent you this file, why didn't you respond? Things like that, so it's relatively easy. But it's a challenge, and the next step is to expand to languages of interest, so to say.
Correct. Panelists, if you have any questions to Konstantinos.
Yeah, you mentioned the prediction of attacks a couple of times. I found this quite interesting and wondered for what purpose would you like to do that? I mean, I can imagine it's to better estimate the risks and to get defensive measures in place and things like that. But would you use that, like the prediction of attacks, also beyond that? So I'm thinking of like concrete attribution, prosecution, something like that.
Yes. No. I mean, I wouldn't go that far, to be honest. That's a bit of a scary scenario, right?
Exactly.
I think there are a couple of sci-fi movies on this.
Minority Report.
Yes, exactly. So yes, this is not what we're doing. The point is, if you have a group and you identify certain attributes as ideology that I mentioned earlier, right? And then you have other red flags, so to say, you might be monitoring them more closely or something. It's just an indicator. It's not that, there's no intention to act on this proactively. But monitoring is happening in any case to tremendous extents in certain forums and areas. It's just that data is so vast, right? As you would know better than me, of course. So it's a matter of put in order, like creating some order or structure within the information, that sort of thing.
All right.
All right, is there any question from the audience? All right. There is. There you go. Let's wait for Carlos to run.
Hello, Toni Virtanen from Finnish Defense Research Agency. Well, thank you, Konstantinos. You made my day because I'm a psychologist by background, so this was a great talk. And my question is, for the defenders, how do you plan to change their behavior so that it would be more secure? Kind of like, do you try to use some nudging, or what's your plan?
Nudging is a simple way to do. I mean, I say simple, but it's not easily successful, right? So consider a password strength meter, right? It just indicates you with a score or with a color code how strong your password is. Let's say that this is not mandatory for users to follow, but it's an indication. I know you know this. I'm just saying it for everybody else. So. This is a nudge, this is a visual way to convey to the user your password is good or not, or it's somewhere in between. So a combination of these factors along with other, I didn't have the time to expand on this, but it's important who the messenger is when you convey a message. So it has to be someone trusted and respected and someone that people can relate to, or the tone of the message, and whether you try to introduce sanctions or you try to provide some benefits, or there is some other way that you convey your message to users. So it's like, it's a complicated approach, but yes, nudge is one of the ways to do so. I think it's a better way than fear appeals, if you ask me.
So as a follow-up, is there, like, you mentioned the culture, like organizational culture, national cultures. Is there some kind of that in certain cultures it's better to use certain methods to have that change in behavior than in others?
That's a very good question. As far as I know, there is no research targeted exactly to this question, but we do know that different cultures perceive things differently. So, for example, we have a lot of experiments between Westerners and Easterners, so to say. So like a dichotomy between Japan and US, for example, indicates that even our visual perceptions of things is quite different. So you have the Japanese people focusing on a picture more on the background and on the context, and then West, as represented by the US here, focusing more on focal on objects in the front of the picture, right? Things like that. So our perceptions are different. This needs to be taken into consideration for an approach to be successful, yes. And this can change within companies, right? You have multinational companies which do face these issues, and I don't think they have the right tools to overcome them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the questions. Now, with this, I would like to wrap up the panel, and just a final thought. To have a comprehensive defense, you have to have understanding of the technical indicators. You have to have an understanding of your information space awareness. Without that, without the visibility, well, you cannot actually defend against what you don't see. And, well, enhancing that with understanding the personality traits, what you're facing, the adversary, this is an additional dimension that can be taken into this. Above all, well, this is nothing new. Information exchange, talking to each other, not only during the wartime, but especially during the peacetime, is the one that will drive us towards the success. And that's also why we are all here. Thank you, and a big round of applause for our panelists.